It's precisely this, the fourth step. It's this irreducibility that challenges our reason. But where does this irreducibility come from? What is this irreducibility that we try to ride in every possible way, yet we can't seem to grasp it? The meaning? Because our irreducibility, precisely because it demands an explanation from us, calls for an origin. We tend to take this nature of ours for granted. Other beings do not perceive this irreducibility, so they do not sense the void. They do not even experience boredom. What is this irreducibility that we find within ourselves and that leads us to make so many attempts to understand and resolve it? To find an adequate answer to this irreducibility, the first thing we need to help ourselves understand is not to run away, and that so often we don't start from our own experience. Real, as we see in these characters we've mentioned, that is, experience in its completeness and genuineness. So often, we have the perception that man is something already made, but instead, he is life itself. The more we live, the more what we are comes to the surface. It's always something that reveals itself before our eyes, with an immensity we could never have imagined. But despite this, we identify experience with partial impressions, as we saw in Marracash or in Basilari, reducing it to a mere fragment, instead of opening ourselves up completely with an attitude of expectation. That's why the more one becomes aware of the structural disproportion which we hear about at the religious center, this irreducibility, the more we realize it. I realize that no attempt is able to give us an adequate answer when man is reduced simply to an object of scientific research. As Wittgenstein says, we feel that all our possible questions in science were answered, and the problem of life would not even be touched. Now we see how all scientific progress leaves us. Not even a moment to adequately answer this question. That's why, if we don't have this compassion, this tenderness with ourselves to try to understand what we are, we won't be able to understand ourselves, let alone understand the young people we find ourselves constantly coming into contact with. Why? Because we thought we knew man, but as Pegui says, the life of a man, a human life as a man, is not enough to know man. This mystery of ourself appears more and more before our eyes. The eternal mystery of our being, as Leopardi said, and which Ratzinger describes like this, the most personal thing, that which ultimately belongs to us. That is our self is at the same time the least personal thing, because we have received it. Even if we have it within us, it is given. The self is at the same time that. What I have is what belongs to me, less. And even more strikingly, St. Augustine said it with his brilliant synthesis, which today, on his feast day, we can remember. What is something that is as much yours as you yourself are? And what is as little yours as you yourself? If what you are belongs to another, in my life, I have never encountered a greater mystery than myself. He recognizes with rare honesty the giant of literature, Cormac McCarthy, in one of his novels. And why is that? What is this that we are? Don Giussani describes it perfectly in the religious sense, quoting Dostoevsky. The bee knows the formula of its hive. The humble ant inherently knows the intricate shape of its complex anthill, but humanity, in its vastness, often does not truly comprehend its own fundamental formula. Because, Don Giussani continues, the formula of man is the free relationship with the infinite. And so it cannot be contained by any measure. And it breaks through the walls of any dwelling where one tries to confine it. The questions and the evident features that make up the heart, or the basic experience, are the trace of this free relationship with the infinite. If we don't understand this, in the profound sense that the more we truly live, the more it becomes abundantly clear what we inherently are and what truly sets us distinctly apart from any other living being. We often cannot fully understand why we feel this persistent uneasiness, why nothing is ever truly enough for us, why we constantly grope around, endlessly searching for something that then inevitably disappoints us. That's why those who have had the courage to take risks, like Marracash or others, ask themselves, okay, I started from nothing. Now I have everything I could want at my disposal. But I still can't find peace. Because I feel an urgent need to understand who I am. That's why we are together and propose this, because I feel the need to understand, as he says, who I am and what I want. Life will never find peace, and we, guys, just like when we meet each other, with all the difficulties we see. But what does it show? This profound disproportion, this insightful expression from Dostoevsky, highlights that man, unlike the industrious bee or the diligent ant, does not truly know his own inherent formula, which is fundamentally a complex and intricate relationship with the infinite. That this relationship with the infinite, which is man, says something about the origin of this man. Giussani. Part of the assumption that nature makes it easy for man to perceive the things necessary for living. That among all necessary things, the most necessary of existence, of why, of meaning, is the existence of God. In his own apology, the Great One, Newman says that at 15 years old, walking down the street, he was struck by the intuition that there were only two self-evident beings: the self and God. The supreme ease in grasping the existence of God, that is, in not feeling alone. With this disproportion, to understand what the origin is and why we were made this way, it is identified with the immediacy of perceiving one's own existence. Because we are not bees, we are not ants. Ants are content to be ants. They don't get tired of it, but we are not satisfied. Why? Because this shows who made us and why we were made. That's why the ultimate ease in grasping existence comes from realizing something we take for granted, that we feel this disproportion, that we feel this longing. Because God, for those who are aware of this disproportion, is it the immediate implication of self-awareness? How is it possible that we feel this disproportion, given how limited we are? Because we are made by someone else? We are made for a relationship with the infinite. That is, we have been launched. Because the one who made us in such a way that only he could fill the life of each of us. That's precisely why St. Augustine, with his profound genius, eloquently says, addressing God directly, "You show quite clearly the immense greatness you wanted to bestow upon the rational creature, that is to say, upon you and upon me. You show clearly what truly immense greatness, what profound and significant greatness you intended to impart. We have, because for its blessed rest, for its fullness, nothing less than you with a capital Y is enough. That's why when someone realizes that all this need for fullness, that this irreducibility is not a condemnation, that we are made for the infinite, he starts to truly realize that he can indeed get out of this terrible nightmare of endlessly searching in material things that can't genuinely fill his life and provide him with true contentment, and begins to decide to face the question, but am I open to this possibility? Or do I prefer to keep stumbling around, knowing that nothing is enough unless it's you with a capital Y? That's why the more this comes to the surface in our awareness, the more we understand that this is the time of the person. Because the harder the times are, the more life. The more life challenges us, the more the individual is what matters. The person is what matters. The decision that the person makes in the face of this issue is what counts. And there are no shortcuts there. Why? This is the greatest resource we have to avoid succumbing to the dictatorship of those who want to control us. Fooling ourselves, trying to respond with attempts that have already proven to be failures. So, to conclude, what is a person and what gives them the strength to live life? In this historical moment we're living through with more strength, less being tossed around, less confusion. What is urgently needed for a person to truly be, for the human subject to have strength? In this situation, where everything is torn from its roots to become dry leaves, is self-awareness. What is self-awareness? A clear perception and a loving one of ourselves, just as we would like. To have this clear and loving perception of ourselves, this ability to embrace ourselves, filled with the awareness of our own destiny, because that's how we are made, because that's how we are, and therefore capable of true affection for ourselves. How hard it is to find someone who truly has this affection for themselves, freed from the instinctive dullness of self-love. If we lose this identity, nothing benefits us. This is confirmed by the daily experience of those who are able to have affection for themselves. Self-awareness, therefore, represents the newness of life. You feel a new life when you realize who you are. And this is shown by some of us who, by accepting what we constantly focus on in the religious center, agree to take this journey. One of you said, during this year's journey at the religious center, I had the chance to start a meaningful journey about myself. Myself. The significant challenges that I have received, the extensive texts that I have carefully read, and the profound testimonies that I have attentively listened to were all incredibly valuable tools that genuinely allowed me to find the absolutely right time and the most appropriate context to truly face those pressing questions and deeply complex issues that, in the constant rush and hurried pace of daily life, I often tend to set aside and postpone. I realized that for real professional growth, especially in a delicate and formative context like education, you can't do without a personal journey of growth and discovery. This journey helped me to finally look inside myself without running away, to reflect on myself without fear, on my limits, on my potential, and on the core of my role as an educator. Some of the sessions helped me to pick up my personal search for meaning again, even beyond the professional sphere, and they became a sort of training for my perspective on reality. Toward the talents I encounter every day, and toward myself. And when you do this, and you offer it, you're surprised by the kids' reactions. One of the students who tended to isolate himself the most during the religious center's lessons confided in me during the break that reading the messages that had come in about the issues they were dealing with made her feel cared for, whereas before she had felt invisible in class. For this reason, regarding the proposal of the religious center's journey, I feel the desire to continue. This path helps me not only to live my role as an educator more consciously and deeply, but it also forces me to pause, to find the space and courage to face those existential questions that, for lack of time, or out of fear, I tend and often to ignore. That's why I end up in this historical moment of disorientation, where the urgent need to know ourselves is emerging more and more within us. Because we are even capable of running away from ourselves. How can I discover who I am and what I want? As we have seen in these people, as I just mentioned, and in so many others, it is an event that answers the dramatic sense of dispersion in which we live. It is only an event that can make the elements of the self clear and solid. When someone starts to realize they understand what it means to live not by running away, not by escaping, not by trying to hide, but by being able to embrace themselves. And the paradox is that it isn't a philosophy or a theory that tells us who we are. The extraordinary event of truly coming across a reality just like ours, where we can genuinely understand the fundamental elements in a very clear and incredibly simple way. And this clarity can't come from our own reflection, but only from encountering a reality, an event. Because, as Giussani says, a person finds themselves again in a living encounter. That is to say, it's a presence that invades you and radiates an attraction. An attraction truly means that it deeply stirs something within our hearts, as Mina clearly shows and demonstrates. You come across a presence that makes your heart burst. It's simple. It's as if you sense that, yes, it exists. It really exists. That thing you were made for. You arrived, you looked at me, and everything changed for me. You made my heart explode inside. Maybe it's because you looked at me like no one ever has before. And suddenly, I feel alive because of you. That's why. The discovery of oneself is really the beginning of this life, where you feel alive without needing to run away, as one of you said, and with that, I'll finish. It became clear to me that what I experienced in the classroom wasn't enough for me, that the questions the students had were, in the end, the same as mine, that I needed to dig deeper myself before guiding the students to really engage with the dynamics of life and what they stir up in you. In this situation, like in so many others in life, someone comes along who seems to sense this need, this necessity to no longer leave anything to chance, but to follow the desire that becomes more and more insistent. And so I received the invitation to take part in the Friday prayers. I had to think about it. The question was whether to go along with this desire or to give more weight to the fear of being judged as a newcomer, because it's not always easy to approach the group. But then, by accepting, something happens. The unexpected, a meeting, both anticipated and unforeseen. So, what now? By listening, engaging in dialogue, asking questions, and not settling for the first answer, you start to have a real life-to-life experience. Something tangible. Or, as the last person said, working on the religious center is tough, because it doesn't let me compromise with myself. And it forces me to give myself reasons. I think that being challenged every time I cross the threshold of the classroom, having to come to terms with the deepest needs of my life, has been the most useful thing for me. Taking myself seriously, in fact, is the chance to discover more about who I am and what I'm here to do in the world. That's why being serious about my own questions has made me more curious. I no longer need to run away from life. As the kids have said, that by being together, they might find an answer. At the very least, it's a path that, little by little, starts to offer them a hint of that answer. It moves me to see kids who have been deeply hurt by life, who finally start to breathe again. I quote their words, and that for the first time they feel like they're in a real family. I think all of this starts from beginning to take yourself seriously and not running away from the big questions that are often hard to face, and that the world often tells us not to think about. The result is an intensity and a taste for life that's unmatched. As one person said, a talent, I quote, "I do the same things as before studying, playing soccer with my friends, but things have a new beauty and intensity. A new one." I hope to continue this work next year as well. An opportunity open to each of us. Thank you.